20:45 in Wellington, New Zealand, and it's 7:45 a.m. here in London. Now, as a global fallout from the Iran conflict continues to worsen, New Zealand says it's made no commitment to military action in the Middle East. This is despite being named by the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte as part of a group of countries looking to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Rutte says more than 20 nations are working together to keep the vital shipping route open, but Wellington insists it hasn't signed up to any specific role, even as rising oil prices are beginning to bite. Well, to explore what New Zealand's position really is, Dr. Geoffrey Miller, is a geopolitical analyst with the Democracy Project in New Zealand, and he joins me now. Good evening, Geoffrey.
Good evening to you, Emma. Good morning.
So, can you explain, where does New Zealand actually stand?
Oh, look, it's a complicated story, Emma. Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister here, got himself tied up into some knots at the beginning of the conflict, explaining New Zealand's position, because New Zealand took a position similar to France and Germany on the conflict. It acknowledged the US-Israeli strikes, but did not support them, and it condemned the Iranian strikes. And there were some real questions over Christopher Luxon's leadership in the wake of quite a disastrous press conference in which he tried to explain that position and as I said, tied himself up in knots answering some of the journalists' questions. I think things have moved on since then, and New Zealand has found its footing, and the Prime Minister has found his feet when it comes to this. So New Zealand supported the UN Security Council Resolution 2817 and was a co-sponsor of that, condemning Iran's retaliatory strikes on the Gulf states. And then, most recently, it signed up to this joint statement that around 22 countries, I think, now have signed, mostly European states, but also a number from the Gulf, also in Asia. And that really, it had that wording there of expressing readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. And I think New Zealand is willing to contribute to efforts, but exactly what that constitutes is, I guess, the big question. And Mark Rutte, of course, is trying to, I think, lead countries on more the military route. I think New Zealand is a bit reluctant to go down that path just yet.
Indeed. I mean, you talk about signing up to a statement which talks about expressing readiness, but what does that actually look like?
Look, I think it's deliberately a vague phrasing, isn't it? And I think at the moment everyone realises that it's a war zone there in the Strait of Hormuz, and going into the strait would be a suicide mission. I mean, the United States, the world's most powerful military, hasn't done it. I don't think why you would expect New Zealand and a number of these other NATO countries and partner countries to really be able to do much better. But, things can change, and there may be a ceasefire for all we know in a week's time or a month's time. You hope so. And then perhaps there is a role for New Zealand and other countries to play in monitoring and patrols of the Strait of Hormuz. And New Zealand ships and frigates have been going up to the Middle East for surveillance and patrol missions for well over 20 years, since the aftermath of 9/11, really. So New Zealand could play a small but important role in any kind of multilateral mission. But I think that's for the future down the track, not for now.
Indeed, and this is actually affecting New Zealanders' pockets already. We mentioned in the news that the New Zealand government is offer weekly cash fuel payments to help people pay for petrol. How much is this actually biting?
That's right. New Zealand is grappling, like all countries are at the moment, with this fuel crisis. And Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister, has used that word to describe what we're seeing at the moment, a crisis. And that measure came out today that around 150,000 households will be given a small payment of around 50 New Zealand dollars. I think it's around 30 odd US dollars a week to try and help stave off the worst of these impacts. And that will cost a significant chunk of money in the New Zealand's context, around 200 million US dollars. And for Nicola Willis, the finance minister, who's trying to make the sums work in the budget that's coming out in May, that's going to be tough. So it's really an unexpected bump in the road, what we're seeing now, the crisis with Iran, for New Zealand and the New Zealand government, which had really been promoting green shoots in the economy, as it seemed as recently as a month ago. Everything seemed to be looking good for New Zealand this year after a couple of lacklustre years of economic performance. But all bets are off now, with petrol well over the $3 New Zealand mark here, which is quite a significant pain point for a lot of motorists in the country.
Dr. Geoffrey Miller, thank you for joining us on the line from Wellington. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.